Hello everyone, and welcome to my CBS BNB Full Today channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The late autumn sun poured through the extensive windows of the Forrester living room, bathing the space in warm golds and deep murk that felt deceptively calm for what was about to unfold. The house was quiet, too quiet, nearly as if the walls themselves tasted the verity creeping near, ready to tear through generations of precisely guarded falsehoods. John Finn Finnegan stood near the fireplace, his jaw tight, his eyes distant, a folded manila envelope gripped in his hand. Inside it was a DNA report he'd no way intended to read, one he'd hoped would tell him he was wrong, that the troubling dubieties clawing at his heart were nothing further than stress, prostration, paranoia. But the paper didn't lie. Science didn't lie. And the verity, brutal, inarguable, was about to crump at the very heart of the Forrester family. She's not his son. The words echoed in Finn's mind like a projectile, resonating again and again until his casket felt too tight to breathe. Steffi entered the room, her heels clicking vocally against the polished bottom, a hint of concern formerly etched into her expression. She'd seen Finn like this before, tense, distracted, carrying the weight of commodity he didn't know how to partake, but this was different. This was heavier. This was the look of a man standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that formerly he spoke, there would be no turning back. "Finn," she asked gently, "you said you demanded to talk. What's going on?" Finn turned to her sluggishly, searching her face for strength, for consolation, for some sign that this moment might ever soften itself. But there was no wimpiness left. Only verity. "Steffi," he began, his voice low and unsteady. "There's commodity I need to tell you. Commodity that's going to change everything." Before Steffi could respond, steps echoed from the hallway. Rich Forrester entered, followed nearly by Brooke, Eric and Taylor, summoned by a vague, critical communication Finn had transferred before, asking them all to gather, averring it couldn't stay. The pressure in the room thickened incontinently, a familiar Forrester prelude to disaster. Rich crossed his arms, eyes narrowing. "All right, Finn. You've got everyone then. What's this about?" Finn swallowed hard, glancing at each of them in turn. These weren't just his in-laws. They were an institution. A dynasty erected on heritage, pedigrees and names passed down like sacred heritages. And he was about to tell them that bone of those pedigrees wasn't real. "I didn't go looking for this," Finn said precisely. "I need you all to understand that. But formerly I saw the inconsistencies, formerly I started asking questions I couldn't ignore it." Eric leaned forward, concern heightening the lines on his face. "Son, you're fussing us. Just say what you need to say." Finn exhaled sprucely and opened the envelope, pulling out the report with hands that quivered despite his sweats to undergird them. "This is a DNA test," he said. "And according to this, the man who believes he's her father isn't." The room went deathly still. Steffi's eyes widened. Brooke smelled in a sharp breath. Ridge's face darkened with confusion and unbelief. "Who are you talking about?" Ridge demanded. Finn looked directly at him, his voice slightly above a tail when he answered. "I'm talking about you, Ridge. And I'm talking about your son." Taylor's heart dropped into her stomach. "No," she said incontinently, shaking her head. "That's insolvable." Brooke's hand flew to her mouth. "Which son?" she asked, though commodity in her tone suggested she formerly knew the answer. Finn dithered only an alternate before delivering the blow. "She's not your natural son, Ridge. The test confirms it." The words hung in the air like bank after an explosion. Ridge took a step back, his face draining of color. That's not funny," he said, forcing a laugh that induced no bone. "This isn't some kind of joke, Finn." Finn shook his head sluggishly. "I wish it were." Steffi felt the world cock beneath her bases. "Finn, stop," she contended. "You're wrong. You have to be wrong." Finn turned to her, pain submerging his eyes. "Steffi, I twice checked. I ran it doubly. The results are conclusive." Eric stood suddenly, his voice pulsing with wrathfulness and unbelief. "You're telling us that after all these times, after everything, one of my granddaughters isn't a Forrester?" Finn swallowed. "She's a Forrester in every way that matters," he said vocally. "But biologically, no. Ridge's mind contended, recollections flashing uncontrollably. Birthdays, mileposts, arguments, rapprochements, moments of fierce pride. Which one? He demanded again, his voice cracking now. Finn met his aspect, the weight of the moment crushing him. She's not your son, Ridge. Steffi felt gashes soak her eyes as the counter-accusations crashed over her in swells. Family wasn't just family at Forrester Creations. It was currency, identity, power. This disclosure hovered to unravel decades of history. How? Taylor rumored. How could this be? Finn Dithard also spoke precisely. There are gaps in the timeline. Medical records that didn't align. A patron train that was sealed but not destroyed. Brooke's eyes filled with gashes as consummation actualized. Oh my God, she breathed. This goes back to the history. To secrets we allowed. We're buried. Ridge turned toward Taylor, his eyes searching her face with hopeless urgency. Taylor, he said still. Is there commodity you're not telling me? Taylor quailed as if struck. Ridge, her voice broke. I no way meant for this to be. The room erupted. You knew. Brooke demanded. You knew there was a possibility? Taylor shook her head, gashes streaming now. I didn't know for sure. I was youthful. I was spooked. There was a procedure, a mistake, a moment when effects weren't clear. I allowed. No, I believed you were her father. Ridge staggered back, his world shattering piece by piece. So all these times, he muttered. All this time. Eric closed his eyes, devastated. This family has survived affairs, backstabbings, secrets that would destroy anyone differently, he said gravely. But this cuts deep. Steffi stepped forward, her voice fierce despite her gashes. Blood doesn't define us, she said. Love does. Dad raised her. He's her father. Ridge looked at Steffi, also pain and love warring in his eyes. I do'n't watch what a piece of paper says, he said hoarsely. She's my son. Nothing will ever change that. But indeed, as he spoke, everyone in the room knew the verity had formerly begun to ripple outward, hanging to touch every corner of their lives. Questions impended about heritage, about identity, about what differently might be hidden beneath the face. Finn folded the report sluggishly, guilt importing heavily on him. I didn't want to hurt anyone, he said. But secrets like this do'n't stay buried ever. Brooke wiped her gashes, her voice pulsing. What happens now? She asked. No Bone answered. Because in that moment, the Forresters understood one inarguable fact: nothing would ever be the same again. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long murk across the Forrester estate, murk that imaged the bones, now stretching across the family's future. The verity was out. The shockwaves had begun. And in Los Angeles, where love and treason so frequently walk hand in hand, the disclosure that she's not his son promised consequences far more explosive than anyone could yet imagine. The silence that followed Ridge's protestation was suffocating. No Bone moved. No Bone dared to breathe too loudly, as though the fewest sound might shatter what little emotional balance remained. Ridge stood frozen, his hands gripped into fists, his casket rising and falling as he tried to anchor himself to the one verity he still believed in, that anyhow of DNA, he was her father. He'd been there for scraped knees, teenage dolor, triumphs, failures, and every moment in between. No lab result could abolish that. And yet, the mistrustfulness had been planted, and mistrustfulness was a bane the Forresters knew all too well. Taylor broke the silence first. Ridge, please, she said, her voice shaking. I no way wanted this to come out like this. Her eyes danced to Finn, also to Steffi, filled with shame and remorse. I induced myself it didn't matter. That biology didn't matter. And perhaps it shouldn't. But secrets have a way of demanding their price. Brooke folded her arms tightly around herself, torn between sympathy and wrathfulness. Taylor, you let Ridge live a taradiddle for decades, she said vocally, the hurt unmistakable. You let all of us live it. Taylor squinched. I loved him, she replied. I still do. And I loved our family enough to believe the verity would only destroy it. Eric stepped near to Ridge, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. Son, he said gravely, no matter what comes next, you aren't alone. Ridge jounced, though his eyes were glassy. I do'n't indeed know what comes next, he admitted. I don't know how to walk into another room and look at her without wondering who she really is, where she really comes from. Steffi snapped to attention. Dad, she said forcefully, don't do that. Don't question her place in your life. That's exactly how families fall piecemeal. Finn watched Steffi with admiration and guilt. This was the woman he loved, strong, pious, fiercely defensive. And he was the man who had dropped a lemon in the middle of her family. Word of the disclosure didn't stay contained for long. At Forrester Creations, whispers gurgled through the hallways like campfire. Sidekicks changed uneasy ganders. Directors spoke in hushed tones behind unrestricted doors. Heritage signified in this structure, and rumors about pedigrees were more dangerous than any hostile preemption. Carter Walton called an exigency meeting, his legal mind formerly contending ahead to implicit consequences. However, he advised Ridge and Eric, there could be challenges. If this gets out intimately, trusts, shares, heritage, it all becomes complicated. Ridge slammed his hand on the conference table. I don't watch about shares, he snapped. I watch about my family. Carter jounced sympathetically. I know, but the world doesn't always watch about what's right. Cares about what's sustainable. Meanwhile, across city, Sheila Carter sat alone at Il Giardino, swirling a glass of wine, her eyes sharp with curiosity as she heeded to a hushed discussion at a near table. A familiar name drifted toward her cognizance, Forrester. Her lips twisted into a slow, dangerous smile. Oh, she muttered to herself. Now this sounds intriguing. Sheila had always had a knack for seeing weakness, for smelling reproach before it broke. And if there was one thing she loved further than chaos, it was Forrester chaos. Secrets about daughters, she rumored. I wonder how long before that little Verity explodes. Back at the Sandhouse, the emotional risk began to sink by. Ridge sat alone, gaping out at the ocean, recollections washing over him like grim swells. Every moment he'd spent believing in a natural bond now felt fragile, uncertain. When the door opened, he didn't turn. I know it's you, he said still. Only you walk in like you enjoy the place. Brooke approached sluggishly. I'm not then to fight, she said. I'm then because I know what it feels like when your entire reality shifts. Ridge scarfed vocally. Do you? Brooke jounced. Further than you know. And what I've learned is this: Verity hurts, but it also frees us from living in fear. Ridge eventually looked at her, eyes filled with anguish. I'm not hysterical of the Verity, he said. I'm hysterical of what it'll do to her when she finds out. Because she hadn't yet. The one person at the center of it all was still ignorant. And Finn knew that couldn't last. He stood outside the door, heart pounding, knowing he was about to change someone's life ever again. When the door opened, her smile faded incontinently at the sight of his face. Finn, she asked. What's wrong? He stepped outside, closing the door behind him, the weight of the moment nearly unsupportable. There's commodity I need to tell you, he said vocally. Commodity about your family. About your father. She lowered. What about him? Finn dithered. Also spoke the words that would review her sense of tone. Ridge isn't your natural father. The world sounded to stop spinning. What? She rumored. Finn explained sluggishly, precisely, his voice gentle but unvarying. With every judgment, her face drained of color. No, she said eventually, shaking her head. That's not possible. Gashes welled in her eyes as unbelief gave way to shock, also wrathfulness. This is a mistake, she claimed. It has to be. Finn shook his head sorely. I'm so sorry. Her casket tensed as questions swamped her mind. Also, who am I? She asked. Who's my real father? Finn had no answers, only silence. When she brazened Ridge, the pain was immediate and raw. You knew? She asked, gashes streaming down her face. Ridge rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. No, he said fiercely. But here to me none of this changes how I feel about you. She pulled back, searching his eyes. But it changes how I feel about myself, she replied. I don't know where I belong presently. Ridge cupped her face gently. You belong with me, he said. With this family. Always. Yet indeed as he spoke, she tasted the query beneath his words, and it hurt more than the Verity itself. Taylor watched the fallout with a broken heart. She tried to explain, to justify, to apologize, but justifications couldn't undo decades of silence. "I wanted to cover you," she said through gashes. "I wanted to cover him." Her son's response was quiet but ruinous. "You took down my right to know who I am," she said. That wasn't protection. The rift between them widened, painful and deep. And just when the family allowed, effects couldn't get worse, Sheila made her move. Armed with whispers and half-trueness, she assured the secret reached the press. Captions exploded across tabloids and entertainment spots within hours. Forrester family shaken in paternity bombshell. Cameras bivouacked outside the manse. Journalists cried questions. The reproach was public and enduring. Eric watched the news in silence, his heart heavy. "This family has been through wars," he muttered. "But this bone, is tearing us piecemeal from the inside." As the storm raged, lines were drawn. Some cleaved to tradition. Others demanded honesty. And at the center of it all stood a woman forced to review herself in the harsh light of public scrutiny. Love, fidelity, and heritage collided, proving formally again that on the bold and the beautiful, the verity doesn't just set you free, it changes everything. The media storm grew louder with every fleeting hour. Satellite vans lined the road outside the Forrester estate, their blinking lights illuminating the night like emblameworthiness. Outside, the house felt lower than ever, the walls closing in as decades of secrets echoed through every room. Ridge stood at the window, gaping out at the chaos he could no longer control. For the first time in his life, the Forrester name, formerly his topmost source of pride, felt like a burden he wasn't sure he could carry. Behind him, Eric sat heavily on the lounge, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "We've survived dishonors ahead," Eric said still. "But this isn't just business or love. This goes to the core of who we are." Ridge jounced sluggishly. "I keep allowing about all the times I told her how proud I was that she was a Forrester," he admitted. "Now every word feels like a taradiddle." Eric looked up sprucely. "No," he said forcefully. "You loved her. You raised her. That was no way a taradiddle. Don't let anyone, not the press, not a DNA test, take that down from you." Across city, she sat alone at the sandhouse, the sound of swells crashing outside mirroring the fermentation in her casket. She goggled at old photos spread across the coffee table. Family recesses, birthdays, fashion shows. Each image now tainted by mistrustfulness. Every smile felt questioned, every memory rewritten. Was any of this real? She wondered. Or had she been living someone additional story each along? When Steffi arrived, she slightly looked up. "I don't want sympathy," she said flatly. "And I don't want defenses." Steffi sat beside her anyway. "Good," she replied. "Because I'm not then to give you moreover. I'm then because you're my family. And that hasn't changed." Gashes eventually revealed over. "Everyone keeps saying that," she said plaintively. "But they don't know what it feels like to look in the glass and not fate yourself." Steffi reached for her hand. "Perhaps not," she said vocally. "But I know what it feels like to lose the ground beneath your bases. And I also know this: you are who you've always been. This doesn't abolish you." She shook her head. "It erases my certainty. My history. I don't indeed know who my real father is." Steffi dithered. "Does knowing his name really matter further than the man who showed up for you every day?" The question dallied unanswered. At Forrester Creations, the boardroom buzzed with pressure. Carter laid out the legal realities while directors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. However, Carter advised, it could complicate trusts and shares if any outside party comes forward claiming paternal rights. Ridge stood suddenly. "No bone is coming for her," he said sprucely. "I wouldn't allow it." Carter jounced cautiously. "Emotionally, I understand. Fairly, we need to be prepared." The implied fear hung in the air. What if the verity invited someone from the history? Someone who wanted further than answers? That fear wasn't unsupported. In a modest apartment long halls down, a man goggled at the TV, firmed as captions scrolled across the screen. The Forrester name. The maternity reproach. The son who might be his. His hands quivered as recollections long buried resurfaced. An affair, a farewell. A life he'd no way known he'd left before. "It can't be," he rumored. But deep down he knew it could. And that knowledge burned commodity dangerous stopgap. Back at Il Giardino, Sheila Carter virtually glowed with satisfaction as she scrolled through her phone. "Oh, Taylor," she muttered. "You always were terrible at keeping secrets." Deacon approached cautiously. "You look pleased," he noted. Sheila smiled.